Whew, that was a close one. That's one of my nightmares is forgetting to press record. So welcome everybody to our Facebook Live panel chat on grief. And I just want to start today by dedicating this panel chat to a dear friend of mine who is going through some grief, and also to all of the humans who are grieving over the now and into the future. So, all right, welcome everybody. Welcome panelists. Thank you so much for joining us today. As we start out today, we're just going to jump right in. I would like for you to introduce yourself, tell us where you're coming from, any other pertinent information that we need to know, and also to just tell us how you define or describe grief. Lisa, let's start with Lisa. Lisa, well, you're both Lisa S. Lisa, Lesa Spravka, can you start us off?
Um, um, I'm really first of all, I'm Lisa. I'm from San Antonio, Texas, and I'm all about feelings. So this topic is very attractive to me. Um, and um, Actually, I have a sociological mind, and I feel like the word grief a little bit sanitizes and pulls us away from the feeling of sadness. um, and makes it complicated and mysterious. And it's pretty, to me, it's just feeling a lot of sadness. Um, yeah, that's it.
Wow, that's interesting. I can't wait to dive a little bit more into that. Thea, could you please
Oh
introduce
gosh.
yourself?
Sure. I'm Thea Sullivan and I'm in Ojai, California. And gosh, I think about grief as just the inevitable sort of result of love and loss or expectations and loss. Um, yeah, I think it's a lot about the painful experience of letting go of something or someone, whether it can be an idea or an expectation or a person or a period of time. Um, yeah, I think that's what I'll start with.
Thank you. Thank you. Lisa Stokke?
I'm Lesa Stokke. And I live near Boulder, Colorado. Right now I'm visiting family. So I'm in the Midwest right now, where I grew up. And, it's interesting when I started thinking about it's interesting because I've actually been thinking about this topic all week. So it's interesting that you asked me to join this, rather recently. And I was just talking, um, with my daughter yesterday about it and the importance of experiencing grief, just for something, or acknowledging it rather, which is also experiencing it, a part of you that you didn't get to experience or that you didn't choose to, or a life you didn't choose to live. And so, I think as women, it can be, I know women who didn't have as many children as they wanted. I know women who didn't get to have like the type of career they wanted or some aspect of their life, right? And I feel like the more that these things go unacknowledged or not experienced, it makes it that much more challenging to move into, you know, whatever else there was for you. Now, that's a different kind of grief, obviously, than when we, may suddenly lose someone we're close to, you know. But I liked what Thea said that a lot of it does have to come with a lot of times expectations are involved, right? Just like with what I said. But I think to sum it up, I think I mostly see it as the ending of a cycle,
Mm.
that life is just a series of cycles and cycles and cycles, right? Many different cycles. And so I think it's crucial to experience it so we can move forward into the next incarnation, the next birth, if you will.
Mm, I love that. Thank you. Joan?
Well, reflecting on, I'm Joan Advent, and I'm in Virginia in the Richmond area. We just had the monks walking for peace here a week ago. So
Wow, nice.
that feels noteworthy just to mention that. And when I think about this topic, it's interesting because so much of what's been said already, I absolutely resonate with and could say yes, that is it. And for me, I'm deeply heart-centered, emotional person as well, as Lesa expressed at the beginning, but it's always a very visceral experience for me. And so I was thinking about, it's like whether it's the architecture of who we are, like our being, and whether it's our dreams or loved ones or things that have naturally come to completion, that there is, in a way, from my experience, like an altering that occurs with the loss. And I think about a tree that's fallen and the roots are pulled up out of the earth, and you see this hole. And depending on the size of the loss, it could be that big, like cavernous. I was walking in the woods today, like this big cavernous hole in the architecture of who we are. Or it might be just like a little weed that's been plucked, depending on the spectrum of things. But part of grief and being willing to grieve, as I see it, is that it is the reforming of who we are, having been touched by whatever that, whether it be it a person or, as I said, a dream of ours, how it impacted us, how it structured us, and then who we are in the aftermath of going through the process of grieving and letting go and kind of being reborn, as you said, in a new form.
Mm-hmm.
I just love the analogy of the tree. I think that's really beautiful and very powerful. I'm Kay. I'm still in Arizona. I I just wanted to add here that one of my teachers once said that trauma occurs anytime, and I want to say also that I feel the same way about the word trauma as Lesa was hinting to with the word grief, is that it's such a clinical term for something so incredibly powerful. But he said that trauma occurs anytime something happens that you didn't expect. And I thought, wow, this kind of describes the spectrum of griefs that we encounter as human beings, from something very slight, like somebody standing you up or breaking up with you, to something much, much bigger, the loss or a terrible diagnosis, or, all the things that we know about. And I feel like shock is what occurs after, or the trauma creates shock, and grief is what happens after any shock. I want to give this example that I was thinking of today. I was hit by a car as a pedestrian when I was 5 months pregnant with my first child, son. And I had these two simultaneous experiences going on within me. On the one hand, I felt very lucky that I didn't lose my life. I didn't lose my baby. I wasn't terribly injured. And at the same time, it was such a shock to my system and my body and my experience that I experienced this incredible grief over it that the world was no longer the safe place that I thought it was just minutes before. And I also want to kind of bring up the idea that, as Joan mentioned, we have this spectrum of experiences of grief. And also there's different categories of grief, like grief. Like we have our own personal grief that we go through. And then we have the collective grief that you are part of humanity, and what humanity is experiencing right now is a shock and a trauma. And so we're experiencing grief there. And then there's sort of this existential grief, which I relate to the shock that being human is, something inside of us knowing that this is not the way it was supposed to go. You know, we are loving children of God and we should be playing in flower fields. And so, yeah, so I just kind of thought I would throw that out there as we're moving through this discussion, whether you can kind of address the grief on these varying levels. So, let's just get personal for a moment. And can you describe maybe one of those three categories of how you experienced grief and how it was expressed? More importantly, all of the varying ways that grief can be expressed in any one human being. So, Lisa, you're on my screen, so Lesa Stokke, I'll go with you first.
Okay, sorry about that. I have a almost 4-year-old here, so I'm sorry.
Right, all right. Joan usually has a dog. So.
Could you please repeat what your
Yeah,
question
can
was?
you share with us an expression of grief that you have had that maybe fits into one of those three categories, the personal, the collective, the existential? And what I really want to get at is the many forms that grief can be expressed in us.
Yeah. That's a that's a very that's a really good perspective. Because at least for me personally, I find that as I'm able to process grief more personally, then I can stabilize into it a little bit more as I expand that perspective. Um, because, I think that processing that grief as a human or existentially, that can be incredibly ungrounding, right? Because you have to acknowledge all of these things lots of times, like just how you even define reality, right? And of course we have, and everything is layers like that, it's like layers of the onion, the macro and the micro, and as above so below, and the whole thing, right? But I feel like it's almost comparable to, and maybe it's because I'm thinking about my granddaughter in the other room, but how how we can we can process things as a child, and then of course as we grow older, our world gets bigger, and we can hold more, right? And we can process more, and we can feel more, and we can stabilize into those things, right? And when I say stabilize, because lots of times our emotions, you know, it is something that we really have to learn, to really lean into and see the gift that's in it, right? In those emotions that are these, energetic catalysts, right? I'm a big believer that energy is just energy, and it just takes on these different forms and edges and, geometry, right? And it has different information in it, right? Depending on what the emotion is. And so as we're able to, receive it, like really receive it and sit with it, um, there's always a gift underneath it. And I think a lot of it has to do with, like I said, for me, back to those cycles again, of being able to move into what the next incarnation is. Because if we allow ourselves to experience these things, to feel the energetic impulses that we're generating, um, and allow them to really move through our whole bodily system. The gift in that is, you know, it's like, it is like a lot like the tree. It's a good analogy because I processed that this last winter, that I watched this big old mother cottonwood in my neighborhood. And I noticed as she lost her tree, or her leaves rather, I thought, she's not likely, grieving the loss of those leaves, right? There will be more leaves that are coming. And it's this cycle, and it's just over and over and over. But imagine if you say, no, 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 I'm going to stay in this winter. I'm going to stay in that winter and be in grief and sadness. And, you know, I call it looping, you know, when we don't allow ourselves to move on. Um, but then we miss the gift of what there is. And there's also a lot of trust in that too, for me. And that trust that I've grown in as I've grown as a woman, that there is always another spring in this example, like infinitely, infinitely. And so when we can step out, like you're saying, and have these smaller views, it's like this pulsing that we can do. And then we come in, like in the winter, and then we can expand again, and we can hold more. And then as we hold more, we have to come in and contract and hold more. And then that's how I believe we evolve and we grow.
Mhm. Yeah, I love a couple of things that well, I loved all of it, but there was a couple of things that you said that really resonated with me. And one of them is that I think what you're pointing to is that there is this possibility of directly experiencing grief and also becoming the observer of you experiencing your grief. And this isn't like a dissociation or a detachment from it at all. It's both experiences at once. And it's like a muscle development and developing, we have these opportunities in our lives to feel grief, to express grief, to heal from grief, and that makes us stronger and more capable of accepting these cycles of life that we are here to experience. I love that. And then I think the other thing that you were alluding to was I don't remember, so I'm gonna sorry. Um, Thea, can you please talk to us about about your experiences with grief and how it expresses itself and whether it relates to the personal or the collective or the cosmic?
Yes. Well, what what's been popping into my mind as we're talking, I mean, many things, but one is, so I'm I do give intuitive guidance and do healing sessions, but I also currently have a full-time job as a middle school language arts teacher, which is how I started my career many, many years ago. And when you talked about collective grief, my seventh graders and I just finished reading a book about Japanese American incarceration. And it just so happened that a bunch of them were on a ski trip this past weekend. And we stopped at Manzanar, which is one of the internment camps or incarceration camps in, in the Eastern Sierra. And I was walking around that camp with one of my students who's a very sensitive soul. And a lot of the kids were just kind of taking it in, but kind of joking around, doing what middle school kids do. But this one kid was just carrying it very heavily and looking to me for help, I think, with like, and he said to me, "What do we do with this?" Kind of like, I don't know what to do with this feeling. And I thought that's collective grief right there. And I had so much respect for him, just to be so open-hearted. And I even saw his dad a couple days later, and he said that really struck him. And I felt the responsibility as the adult to honor the grief that he was feeling. Um, it's there's a beauty to it, there because he was really connecting with what other human beings had gone through and what humanity can do to each other, what we can do to each other. So on the collective side, I think um, I guess I just want to say, in some ways, collective grief is evidence to me of our humanity, our ability to feel. And I guess our challenge is not to get submerged in it. And like the two of you who said, I mean, I'm sure we all are this way, but I'm like super emotional. I process everything through the heart, and that's not an easy way to be. I don't think it's an easy way to be a human. I don't know if there's an easy way to be a human. Um, and then on the personal side, I'm thinking about I feel that have had many seasons of grief for different losses of parents and dreams or visions of what I thought would be in different areas of life. But the one that really stands out for me was that I so wanted to be a mom, and it took my husband and I 6 years to have a child. And there were some heavy losses during that 6 year period. The first one was a miscarriage, which is, very common, but it hit me so deeply that I couldn't understand the grief that I was feeling. And in that case, it actually was coupled with like some shame because I didn't think I should be as devastated as I was. And it felt quite existential, actually. It was based on an idea that if I were a good person and I wanted to be a mother and I always believed I would be and I intuitively felt that I would be, to have this loss was somehow an indictment or a failure. And anyway, I took it in so deeply. I did do that thing where you witness it. Like I watched myself just go down into this hole. I remember, and then there were many years after that of still not conceiving or, other pregnancies that didn't work out. And I remember sitting in meditation at one point during that time and feeling such raw pain of the situation that I was almost like, wow, there's nowhere I can go from this moment. Like I'm just in it. There's no relief. It made me think of that Pema Chodron book, The Wisdom of No Escape, because I just thought I'm so alive right now, and it's just pain. Like I remember that feeling of both witnessing it and experiencing it, and wanting to get away from it and not being able to get away from it, and just feeling like I guess this is just what life is right now. I'll just always remember that. Of course, it changed and evolved and then as I got older and there were a lot more losses or difficult experiences, now I'm quite seasoned at knowing what grief is and knowing that it ends and knowing that it changes will change me. As Lesa said, it'll change me again and again. And I'm not afraid of it anymore. But I was so shocked by those losses early on. And I connect it back to my student only because working with young people is so intense because I'm often the first person they find out about terrible things from, which is hard, and
Wow.
I try to lighten it up, but it's like we do talk about the Holocaust or we talk about things that adults throughout history have done, and some of them they've never heard of this before, and it's a deep responsibility to sort of, it's almost like introducing them to collective grief, which is not really what I want my role to be, but sometimes I'm in that role. So I'm kind of all over the place, but those are the two things that popped into my mind.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful share. That is so powerful. And I think that, it's so easy for us to know when we're in personal grief. Something has happened and we don't feel good about it, and it's overwhelming and it's terrible. And then the collective and existential grief, you may not necessarily know that you're in it. You just may be feeling incredibly overwhelmingly sad or listless or whatever it may be, and not really understand the nature of it. And I want to hear from Lesa, because Lesa Spravka, because you're also a therapist, and so you have the opportunity to guide people through this process. And I'm wondering if you could dive in a little deeper to the what you said earlier about sadness and how that's expressed for people in different ways.
Um, the other big thing I am about feelings is the need to express them to yourself and, without shame, if you can do that, but shame in itself would need to be processed. But mostly with another person who can be empathetic. And what I was thinking of was I'm losing my train here, but um, oh, that the phrase misery loves company is wrong. It's actually misery needs company.
Mm.
Um, because and um, like the other thing I've always heard about grief is that it will take as long as it takes. But I think it is a problem if you're not expressing it, if you don't recognize it in yourself. And actually, Kay, I love that I didn't really know what collective grief was or existential grief, but I've always thought to myself that I feel like when I was born, I was like born into all this family conflict and pain. And I was like, I don't understand why we're just not enjoying each other. Like, and that's like coming in with, I just got here. And and to all of a sudden have all this conflict thrown at you is, I feel like existential pain. There's nothing specific, but you're just really sad about it. Like it could be so different. Um, yeah. So did I get everything? Like
Yeah, yeah, I love what you said about, this that within our experience of grief, there's this innocence. And I think that that is one of the clues to how to help yourself through it. Knowing what, Thea said, there's no way around it. We seem to have chosen a path that brings us a great deal of grief on the daily. And so I like to think of treating yourself as you would a child, as if you're your inner child and experiencing something that is, too difficult. It's too difficult for any of us to really process these things that we go through. And to tend to yourself like you would with patience and compassion and love and allowing it to play out on its own timetable. As you said, there's no timetable to it. And also I mean, the idea of speaking to your grief I think it's so important because, there seems to be, after you experience something, you almost feel like people's empathy has a expiration date, and we have to just challenge ourselves to, even though it's been a year or 2 years or 3 years or 10 years, to say, hey, can you sit with me? I just want to tell you like how much I miss my husband, or whatever it may be, and to give voice, because when you give voice to these feelings, they leave your body and you don't have to hang on to them. And Joan, I'm wondering if you could, thank you so much, Lisa. I love that, those reflections. Joan, you also are in the have the you're in, what am I saying? You are able to sit with people in various stages of grief. So I want to ask you if grief has a purpose, and is it inevitable?
I would say it is inevitable. I would say to the extent we are in our humanity, allowing our humanity, not fighting or defending against our humanity, that grief is inevitable. That it's what is it? It comes standard with with the issue of a body and an emotional body. And then can you ask me the first part again?
Yes. Does it have a purpose? Does grief have a purpose?
Oh, well, to some extent, I think it certainly illuminates how profoundly connected, attached, deeply we loved or let something in. I think it certainly does that. It can clean out, um, can clean us out, so to speak. I would dare say even purify, make us new in some ways. Um, so I would say yes, it does have a purpose.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I had an experience, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, that was probably one of the most difficult things that I faced. And prior to that, I had kind of experienced myself as being sort of almost numb, uh, in an emotional way. And then this experience happened, and I consciously let myself feel everything that I was feeling. And I just opened myself up to that. And my God, the amount of grief that poured through me, I don't think I've ever wept like that in my life. And I can remember, like shouting to the universe, like, what I'm feeling now, like, God damn it. Like, and it because I let myself really, really go into the depths of those feelings. I mean, laying on the floor, a mess of tears, and letting myself lay in bed for a week or whatever was required. I really felt like, as you're saying, that in itself was so healing. And I felt like it was not being held in my body. I didn't, so subsequent grief was not piled on top of that. It was new grief and it was appropriate to the situation. So, that was sort of remarkable, to me at the time. And I think what Lesa Stokke was saying about, us becoming more seasoned with grief, as we experience it more and more, that we do become a little, I mean, better at it. And I also feel that the way that we can that one of the things that can help us process grief is allowing ourselves to love all of life, all of it, regardless of how gnarly it can get or how punishing and damaging and scary and all that stuff. That we don't understand it, but we can still love it. And I think that does help us process it a little bit more, or at least keep it in a context where it doesn't feel quite so overwhelming. I'm not sure.
Can I say
Um,
something about that,
yeah,
Kay?
please.
There's a wonderful quote. It's a line of poetry from Jane Hirschfeld. Maybe you know her work. And it goes, love everything that happens to you. And it's a challenging line, I think. And I've thought about it a lot. And I think it's just what you said, that we can, I think loving something doesn't mean we like it, right? But it means that we sort of surrender to it or say, yes, this is for me, even though I'm hating it right now, or I'm a mess, or I'm whatever. Like, I think it's the resistance. I'm not a therapist, so, Lisa, you can help me out here, but it feels like it's the resistance to feeling it, or the no that slows it down and blocks it up, and um yeah, and just gets it stuck, or the layering over of it with whatever substance or distraction or just resistance, like, because what you're talking about that you experienced is such a act of like radical surrender, right? And acceptance, and said, I'm just going to let this flow through me. And it feels like sometimes it'll kill us, but it doesn't. I think that's what we find out is that it doesn't kill us, and and it, we move through it, or it moves through us, and then we, you know, begin to come out the other side.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful. Thank you.
So,
Um, Lesa Stokke, do you think it's possible to lessen our grief or to ease the experience of it? And if so, how?
Um, well, and maybe I'll take that question as the opportunity to share with you the first major loss that I had in my life. And until I'll say this too, that until just a couple of years ago, maybe, I never knew how old I was when I experienced this.
Mm,
Um, and it was the loss of my grandmother. And at the time, she um I'm at my parents' house as I'm saying this, but she was I'll just say that she was the one who um probably best understood me. Let's just say that. And she was my source of unconditional love. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because I've called upon that experience before, or excuse me, since in my life when I've experienced grief since then. And I've noticed the difference in how I experienced that, even though I would probably say that's been probably the most dramatic loss that I've had in my life, I would say. Um, but due to my age, I didn't have the expectations with it, for one thing. I was always in the now. I was 5 years old. And I mean, I remember the day very, 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 very clearly because it was so profound of when my father told me, that she was gone. And I'm sorry, I still cry like 50 years later, Um, but I'm going to try not to now. So I guess I've used that experience to be like, that was such a major loss in my life. But I, I just kept rolling, because of my understanding as a child of how life and death worked. And I remember immediately just silently, I was looking up at the sky. It's just crazy to me that I did this as a 5-year-old. But I remember just looking up at the sky and just silently saying, I'll see you again soon, when this life is done. And I just knew that so much in my bones, that it was that way. And I remember I had some experiences afterwards, the things that reminded me of her brought up a lot of emotion for me as a child. But I've called on that sense of how I just so kind of not, I don't want to say effortlessly, but sort of seamlessly just moved through it and accepted it and didn't blame anything or anyone or wished for things to be different or whatever. I just immediately accepted it as that's how it was now. And so I've called upon that sense to when I have difficulty letting go of other losses that I've had, that a lot of times it is that expectation or shame attached to it, or guilt attached to it, or some sort of judgment attached to it, like it shouldn't have been that way, or, we do that shoulda, woulda, coulda, and how much the story attaches us to it in a way that maybe prolongs feeling that discomfort, you know, instead of that acceptance, and then we can feel it and it becomes a part of us. Because, you know, like my grandmother's death became a part of my story.
Mhm.
It changed me forever.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah. Yeah. I think
um,
we do tend to think that we're going to automatically be changed for the worse by these things.
yeah.
And I think what you're saying is that's not necessarily true.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know who I would have been if she, you know, had stayed alive forever. But I guess I just developed such, and it's still developed throughout my life, such a profound sense of faith and trust that there's a much higher order to my existence here, and my being is timeless. So I accept that there is a divine occurrence, especially with something as profound as that for me. That that you know that I mean, if depending on your belief system, that it was something that was already, you know, ordained or manifested before I even arrived, before it even occurred, you know.
Mhm.
Because it definitely shaped me as a human, no question. And it gave me a strength and a sturdiness, and a knowing in my life of that strength that I carry. And like I said, I was 5 years old, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that there's this strange occurrence where we're going through the grief as a human being because that's the reality. And also there's this additional grief that we should be going through, that we are going through this thing. It's these two, it's like grief from two different directions when you're hit by something. I don't know if I'm making myself clear on that, but I do feel that it speaks to what you're saying about the fact that we have a little bit of a misunderstanding about the nature of life here because our memory was wiped when we came here, and we apparently believe that we have a finite life in these finite bodies, and when in reality, the part of life that we're viewing is a infinitesimal fraction of the the truth of life, that nothing ever dies, nothing of God ever dies, and that we are still connected long after the alleged ties have been cut, and that we will always be together. And I mean, I think that's probably helpful to us in some way. I thank you so much for that reflection. I want to ask Joan really the same question, which is how do we, is it possible to lessen our experience of grief? And how do we do it? What helps you? What's been your experience?
Well, as Lesa was sharing, I was thinking that culturally, we've really moved away from a collective experience of grief. We have been, um, as with most things, left to our own devices, left to handle it either on our own or in our small little nuclear family, or as Lesa has experienced in a therapist's office. And in previous civilizations, in previous times, grief was a more collective experience, even if it was a personal loss. there was that communal support and presence to help hold the person. And I actually have a very dear friend who is walking through the most unimaginable grief that we can live through as a parent. And I have been witnessing her because she has a vast community of support. And I'm seeing the ways that it is enabling her to meet the grief that comes in waves. And she has that larger sense of things, but having community, you know, having a we to help support any of us or us as a collective to process the grief, in my experience, does help lessen it. I did want to mention, I know I had put it out when you raised this topic, the book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow by Francis Weller, which really explores all these dimensions of grief that you're naming, but it also speaks to the importance of ritual and the importance of coming together in a communal way to process our grief. And I happened to, I don't know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, go through a group process with a number of people who are all using this book as a foundation, and just really acquainting ourselves with grief, and in a way like preparing ourselves for when grief comes along, how to meet it in the most effective way or graceful way, or without the resistance that was named previously.
I love that. Can you share some of the ways that you've seen, like what it feels like, a funeral that's a couple hours long and a luncheon afterward. It's just not enough usually to process the bigness of grief oftentimes. So, do you know of any rituals that we can employ to with our communities to help with that? I love the idea of sharing the grief because, having people help you hold it is has got to be so helpful.
Right. Well, I don't have one that immediately comes to mind, but the book does speak to specific rituals that you can do. But I think about the Wailing Wall, or the keening that women might do together in those times of grief or collective grief. I also think about the Jewish tradition of having a collection of people come to, forgive me, I'm not going to get the word right, but is it Kaddish? They're sitting in
Oh, sitting Shiva.
Shiva. Thank you. Kaddish is a different thing.
Kaddish is the prayer and Shiva is the like 7 day gathering. Yeah.
Okay, so there are traditions built into some cultures like that. Even the wearing of black or the armband, which was a way to signify, like, I'm a person in grief. So people can hold you with a little more tenderness or consciousness. But
Beautiful.
but there are all kinds of things we can do.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like in the past, probably that, the community came together and orchestrated that for the grieving. And
Mhm.
today, if in the absence of that, it's almost upon the onus is on the person suffering to reach out and say, like, I need help, which is a shame, but it's so important. It feels like it would be very very helpful. So thank you for that. Um, let's see, Lesa Spravka, can you speak to what is the best way to be with the grief of others?
I want to answer that, but I've been sitting here thinking of all these things I want to say in response to these things.
Go for it.
So, okay. Um, I've only heard about this, but they've done studies where they've looked at the chemical makeup of tears, and there's a difference between when you're crying about something truly sad or if you're crying because you're happy. The sad ones have actual toxins in them. So somebody spoke about detoxing is a purpose. And then a friend of mine who is Romanian told me that they have a tradition in their churches when someone dies, there's like three or four women whose role it is to cry for everyone. And I
Wow.
was like, I love that. Um, yeah, and that was it. And then allowing someone to how to be with someone's grief is to normalize it, to say anyone would feel that way if that happened to them. That's exactly how you should be feeling. You're operating, well.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for those observations. I love that. Thea, can you answer that question as well? Like, what is the best way to be with people with the grief of others?
I have a friend who uses the phrase just staying in the room with people. And I love that. It's like just not running away, just I'm here. Just being, and I think that's holding space, right? But it's just um, a way of saying that. Just staying in the room, not being afraid of it. And I think that implies what we all know here, but sometimes out in the world, people don't know this. It's like not trying to reassure or placate or say, well, at least dot, 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 or it's going to get better, all of that, right? Like not trying to fix or solve or rush or, yeah, minimize. Just honoring it. I think that can even be in silence and a hug and a presence. Presence. Yeah. Mhm.
Beautiful. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything to say on that subject about holding the grief of others?
I do think when people are in fresh grief, to just show up and tend to the basics, like the being there with food, seeing what they need help with, just those very simple things, and just being a presence to receive, because there are moments of joyful memories, there are moments of immense sorrow, and just not having an expectation either of what you're supposed to do, what they're supposed to do. It it's it's like anything goes in some ways when someone's in fresh grief.
Mm.
I remember when my mom she was in hospice care at home and my siblings were all there and friends of hers would, ask us what we needed. And I remember we did need food because none of us could seem to make food or remember to eat. And I remember one of her good friends saying, well, what kind of food do you want? And even that question was too difficult. Like we were just like food, any food, it doesn't matter. And I remember having a little amnesia too. Like I couldn't hold a thought in my head at that time. I couldn't remember what I was doing. And so that idea of like somebody just doing some executive functioning for you, because I found it really, that was probably the deepest loss I've experienced. And the way that it just wiped my brain for quite a while also you have to, then after someone dies, there's the funeral and there's all the functioning. I remember someone saying like, what a great idea. You're at their lowest point ever and you have to plan a party. Like what? Anyway. So yeah, that executive functioning piece is so critical.
Yeah, I love that. It's so true. I've experienced that where you're just walking around like a zombie without any real understanding of how you're walking through the world. It's like, how am I even upright? I can't function. I
Exactly.
can't even see your own hands. And yeah, so,
Very,
uh, um, beautiful. Well, if anybody has anything else that they would like to contribute to the conversation, something that you think would be helpful to people to know about grief, or how to support people in grief?
Um, Thea said something that made me think of a friend of mine. Her husband had died, and she was in the social work community, so there are a lot of social workers there. And I remember her good friend saying to us, "Don't ask her what she needs. Give her options to say yes or no to. Can I get you this? Can I get you that? Can I do this for you?" And just let her say yes or no.
Mm, very good. Beautiful.
I had one thought, Kay, if I can
Yes,
toss.
please.
Um, well, two things. One is that as I'm looking at a slight like shift in my career, and one thing I've been thinking that's calling to me, among other things, is like like learning how to be a ceremonialist, like learning how to create rituals for people because I've craved them all my life, and I'm sort of like, oh, well, now maybe I can offer that to others. So that feels really exciting to me. But what I was going to say is, I think what's helped me the most around grief, I've also had a long parenting journey that was absolutely nothing like what I expected and still isn't. Um, and has been very challenging in many ways. I think the thing that's helped me most is to tell myself, remind myself that it wasn't supposed to be different. That even though my ego tells me, or my, and I think this goes back to what a lot of you guys have said, but this idea like we come into this human life and we form an ego and we create expectations and we have a narrative and a storyline, right? And then as we get older, like we deconstruct it, but the deconstruction is so painful. And that spiritual knowing of like tapping into that, like even if I feel that it should be different, that's not what's true. Like what's true is what is. And I may not understand it or like it, but that gives me relief when I can give myself that reminder. Um, I'm allowed to have my feelings about it, but I also don't have to make it wrong.
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you all panelists for being with us today. I'm trying to get back to the grid, but it's not working. So,
And I
um,
one
oh
more
yeah,
thing.
go ahead, Joan.
So I am aware, and it feels like what wants to be said, is that there are a collection of souls on this planet who are more, we'll say, tasked with holding, or as Thea was describing, like sensing the larger collective grief. I think there are souls like that in the world, and if you are one of those souls, just to say that there's nothing wrong with you, that it's not something you need to get over, that you're not like a downer or heavy. You're just tuned in and sensitive. And on behalf of the human family, you are the members who are feeling those layers, those many layers of the variety of ways that we need to grieve. So I just wanted to add that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. What a beautiful way to end. So, thank you everybody for joining us. And if you're grieving, our hearts go out to you, and we're here supporting you. And yeah, so thanks everybody.
Thank you, Kay. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
Wonderful to be with you
Bye-bye.
all.